What's good, folks? Welcome to another edition of the Cover One Film Room, the show that gives you the hows and the whys behind both the good and the bad of the Buffalo Bills. I am one of your two hosts, Anthony Prohaska, joined as always by Eric Turner. And Eric, in this edition of the Film Room, Buffalo Bills have been eliminated from the playoffs, courtesy of the Denver Broncos, and also kind of courtesy of themselves with some self-inflicted wounds. And we kind of pivot from our normal standard show. People might be coming in and think, okay, they're going to break down Bills Broncos tape. But given magnitude, given the magnitude of what we've seen to start this week with the Buffalo Bills firing head coach Sean McDermott, GM Brandon Beane staying, getting promoted, and then the Bills having a presser today, courtesy of Terry Pegula and Brandon Beane, to talk about that firing and what has transpired. We will be essentially deep diving into a whole bunch of that presser, video clips, analysis, full context from the clips and from us. Eric, this should be an episode where everybody just sees everything the same and what's set and everything's great. But, before we dive into those pieces, as always, how you doing? How you feeling? How's it going?
Man, I was trying to get work done today, but I'm like tuning into the presser. I'm waiting to run the dog. I got a new dog at work, and I'm waiting to do searches with him. And so I got my earphones in. I'm trying to listen to the presser, but I'm also, trying to work at the same time. So as Anthony said, we're going to do something a little different because we figured, and I even asked the insiders on our Discord channel, hey, do you guys want a recap of the Broncos game? They said, we probably don't care at this point. Why don't you come back to it later? And then we assumed that there would be a presser. So we're going to cover the presser. And we're going to do it in film room fashion. So we're going to use video from the presser as our lead, as the kickoff of our discussions on some of the, the major topics that were in the presser. And we're going to share our thoughts, our opinions. We're not here to change your mind, guys. We're not here to change your mind. We're here to share our thoughts and opinions based on, obviously, what we do each and every week here in the film room. Break things down, slow things down, add context to what happened today. And so I know emotions may run high for you guys in the chat room. Keep it civil. Emotions may run high between Anthony and I because we do have very strong opinions on a lot of these things. So once again, just keep it civil. We're not here to change your mind. You're likely not going to get your minds changed from us, and you're also not going to change anyone's mind in the comments. And honestly, probably going into this presser, you had your mind made up, and that's okay. Those are your feelings. That's fine. But Anthony, let's start off with your overall tone of the presser, your overall takeaway of the presser, how Beane and Pegula handled themselves, how the media handled themselves. What was the tone that you took away from that presser?
Really good starting point. Actually, real quick, I just wanted to highlight these so they don't get lost. Bob came in and said, was that conference duo? Referencing the run play. I like that. And then Kay and Maury said, I'm excited to learn about the X's and O's of this press conference. Mesh, duo, and Sims.
Hey, we got to adapt, right? We got to adapt and overcome. This is what we're doing. So yes, it's a little different here, but we're excited.
As far as the meshing of Terry Pegula and Brandon Beane, in this presser, I thought Terry Pegula, I thought he fared better towards the end. There was a part, the presser was like roughly 50 something minutes long, around like the 44-minute mark. I think he really got down to, what it boiled down to of why you let Sean McDermott go, what he didn't see with him as. And I thought, you can disagree with his thinking, but I thought that was pretty succinct, especially for him. And he got to the point. Cool. Yeah. I think some of his answers early on, some of his interjections didn't. Yeah, you're laughing already.
Interjections, yes, I'm there with you.
Didn't play off in the best way. Especially with Beane being asked, what prevented you guys from you said your roster at the trade deadline was championship caliber or whatever. What prevented you from getting that? And then Terry's just like, a bad call. So I thought he was a little.
It was honestly funny. Yeah, a lot of the internet didn't. They thought it was really, yes, comical, but also what is this guy? Did he not take his meds type of thing? It does come across that way, right?
Yeah, he was a little all over the place, and it is. I kind of also think to be like, this guy's like a gajillionaire. Like, what is how does this happen?
The way I took it though, Ant, is he's a fan.
Also, I took it as he's a fan and he likes the team and likes the sport, and I also kind of took it as maybe he's nervous. He's a little anxious, being up there. The bright lights are on him. He's got to defend himself. People, even he got asked later in the presser, with the new stadium and everything, you've been kind of absent, and he talked for the reasons why. But we don't really see him out in front of the camera a ton. He's not out and about a ton. So I thought, he looked a bit messy at times in some of his verbiage and his reasoning and his responses and things, which we'll get into. I thought Beane came away pretty, calm, cool, and collected on some things. Him trying to walk back some of the things that Pegula was saying, while also trying to explain some things on his end. And again, you could take it with a grain of salt if you don't think they either were being truthful or if you still disagree. Overall, I'm still in the same boat where I was pre-press conference that I am now post-press conference. But I think it was kind of a mixed bag. I think they did some things to help themselves. I think they did some things that are going to draw the ire of the fan base and even some of the reporters. I thought Beane looked better than Pegula. And I also thought the reporters, like you mentioned, I thought the reporters did a pretty good job of kind of, not putting the screws to them, but they asked some good questions. They followed
very
up
poignant. Yeah.
pieces. Yeah, very poignant. I think they could have, if they really wanted to, follow up even harder on certain things, but there were things asked in like the 7-minute mark that got followed up on in like the 35th.
Yeah.
So there were
where he had to reiterate himself and repeat himself. And he's the type of guy that does not like repeating himself. He made it pretty clear. And so, I thought the tone was good. I thought a lot of people were expecting fireworks, and I think there were some, depending on some of the, the answers to the questions.
I think people thought like Beane was going to be like, I stabbed McDermott in the back.
I know.
wanted him gone.
And honestly, and that's why I said we're probably not going to, sway your opinion of this presser because you probably had a preconceived notion about what was going to happen here. I personally went in understanding that Beane is typically very open and upfront in these end of season pressers. He always answers. And honestly, the 50 minutes or whatever that they went live, I thought it was short compared to what he normally does. Normally it's like an hour and a half where he just takes every single question. And I thought he did a good job here. I thought he was honest up front. Both of their body language to me came across very convicted and not rehearsed. I'm sure the PR team walked them through some things, which is kind of scary in itself. But I think they came across as guys that they weren't making stuff up. There was very little fluff. And even some of the stuff that, we're going to go over and the, guys outside of the Buffalo market are pointing out as, lies and stuff like that. I don't find a lot of that to be true because the collaborative effort that happened prior to the firing of Sean McDermott is going to continue in the very same way going forward. It's just a different structure. And so I thought overall the questions were good. The answers were good. There were a couple, crazy moments, but not as bad as I thought it would be. And I appreciate the honesty and transparency of both of them. So let's dive in to a few of these topics, a few of these videos, and I'm going to play them, Anthony and listeners. I'm going to play them. And then there are going to be times where I'm going to stop it and essentially allow us to talk and talk it through and things like that. So if at any given moment, Anthony, as I told you, you want me to stop it, I can stop it and we can talk about it. So let's start off with
real quick. I never thought we'd be in the position to be breaking down press conference film. Like we just keep breaking new territory every year in the film room.
I wish we had more time and resources to call in a body language expert. It's things like that. And honestly, there were a couple I asked you beforehand and asked your opinion. We collaborate on these things. I asked you about, adding a couple people to the panel so we could talk about it and get their point of view, players, ex-players and stuff. And we chose not to just because there's a lot to cover and we'll save that for another day. So let's start off with the decision, as I termed it in our notes, the decision to fire Sean McDermott.
My decision to bring in a new coach was based on the results of our game in Denver. I want to take you in the locker room after that game. I looked around. First thing I noticed was our quarterback with his head down, crying. I looked at all the other players. I looked at their faces and our coaches. I walked over to Josh. He didn't even acknowledge I was there. First thing I said to him, I said, "That was a catch." We all know what I'm talking about. He didn't acknowledge me. He just sat there sobbing. He was listless. He had given everything he had to try to win that game. And looking around, so did all the other players on the team. I saw the pain in Josh's face at his presser, and I felt his pain. I know we can do better, and I know we will get better.
All right, so that's the decision to obviously fire Sean McDermott, and he obviously based it on the sense and the moment of being in the locker room, seeing everyone crying, seeing Josh Allen crying and bawling, can't even respond to the owner who's there to support him and the team. And like I said a few minutes ago, let's keep in mind, perspective-wise, Pegula is a fan. Yes, he owns a team. Yes, he's number one on the totem pole. Yes, he writes everyone's checks. But he's also a fan. And he obviously is super invested in this team, their success, and winning a championship. And for him to see those reactions when everyone's crying and just obviously down and really, really low moment, when this was the lowest of moments that we've seen. And again, the Bills have been through these situations and these playoff losses. That's why he felt he needed to make a change. It was those reactions. We knew as soon as the game was over and Josh stepped up to the podium and he could barely talk and he's crying, everybody, I don't care who you were, even if you're not a fan of the Bills, you knew something was different, that this game was different. Not necessarily because it was a loss to the Bengals or the Chiefs. Something was different here. And so I think that was the, turning point, inflection point, and maybe even just the starting point, according to him, just the starting point of maybe this is it. Maybe we've plateaued.
Yeah, we'd keep coming. He would come back to this moment throughout the rest of the presser, talking about like the locker room and seeing everybody in that moment. And, he gets spoken to later and asked about, was there anything prior to this, thinking of firing Sean McDermott? And he keeps going back to like, it really was that locker room moment. It was him going in, seeing everyone. I found that, I don't want to say surprising, but I guess just how hard it really hit him, like in that moment, to be like, okay, like we can't get past this, or like, can we get past this? What we can do. There's a lot of other quotes and clips, obviously, we're going to get through that. We'll tie this together. But yeah, I get this, to start off this way of him being able to really, I guess I just expected more of like, even though he was reading off the script, as a couple of people pointed out, I guess I just expected more of, not in a bad or good way, I just expected more of, over the years, X, Y, and Z, the fact that he was able to just be like, no, I walked in the locker room and everybody was so broken up and I finally decided, now we got to do something different. Like, I was just like, oh, like, I just wasn't expecting him to hone in right on one moment, one spot, one, I don't want to say reactionary because it paints it in a certain way, but kind of just, like he said, like feeling into that moment, what he saw. I wasn't expecting it to come down to just like one crossing the Rubicon type of moment like it did. I thought it would have been more of a build-up, but I'm sure there was to some degree. But yeah, like just him kind of leading off with that, I found to be really poignant, and I was kind of surprised that he just honed in on one thing, and that was his reasoning for it.
Yeah, he
put us I should say.
He put us back into that moment. He put us into the seat of the owner, but that is also a fan, right? And so I loved what he said in this this next part right here, where he's talking about the wall that the team hit, and I want to play this clip again, and then we'll go through the kind of the discussion with this one, because this was my favorite part of this entire presser. So yes, he puts you in the moment, he frames it and kind of whittles it down to, okay, this is what did it. Obviously not literal. Okay, game over, they lost, I'm firing him. But this is the best part for me of this presser.
You mentioned that you thought it was a catch and you told Josh it was a catch. Why would you fire a coach based on a bad officiating decision?
I did not fire a coach based on a bad officiating decision. If I can take you into that locker room, I felt like we hit the proverbial playoff wall year after year.
I love that. The playoff proverbial wall.
Hmm.
And that's why I say it's not literal. You can't take it literal. Oh, it was a bad call. They lost that game. McDermott, you're fired. The wall that he's talking about is the multitude of losses and heartbreaking playoff losses that the Bills have had under McDermott in the playoffs. Those plays, those moments, those games that McDermott and players refer to as calluses, scars, part of the growth mindset. That message, in many ways, after going through all that trauma, kind of lose their value over time. And I think that had a lot to do with, this buildup and boiling point to firing McDermott. Because in a lot of ways, all that trauma and happening so often now, with the catches that he's referring to here, that in many ways, those memories, those heartbreak losses start to set in and cause doubt, and in many ways can limit the ceiling of a team. So I think that had a lot to do with what he's talking about here and hitting that playoff proverbial wall and all of those heartbreaking losses.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for, we talked about on the show, like how callous they are and the experience, they're battle tested, battle hardened, whatever proverbial you want to use in that regard. But I think there was something to be said for, like, there's only so much character you can build through all like the losses and the heartbreak. Like, you keep building and building and building, but at some point, like, that roller coaster goes down. At some point you jump the shark with all the character building, and it's like, now you're kind of going, because at a certain point it goes from, oh man, like, this, what doesn't kill us make us stronger. We'll get better. But then at a certain point, it's just like, as fans, you've gone through that. If you're a fan of the Bills, you don't even have to make an example, like, where at a certain point you're just like, are we cursed?
Luck.
Like, why does this keep happening to us? Why does the ball never bounce our way? Why does it feel like these calls don't go our way? And the fan base will feel that for a franchise, but the players start to feel that too. You're sitting there just being like, dude, we're here again. Like, another one that was so close, especially in a game where so many things went wrong and they lost in OT by 3 points, where you're just sitting there like, man, if we change any one of these things, it maybe goes a different way. Yeah, I think there's something to be said for all that scar tissue or all that character building from the losses or adversity. At a certain point, it stops building character and it just becomes something that kind of kicks you in the teeth and you kind of go back down from it.
13 seconds, missed field goals, the catch. So I just sensed in that locker room, like, where do we go from here with what we have? And that was the basis for my decision.
So, yeah, I mean, they've been through a lot. This team, this organization has been through a lot. Jason Brown adds, I like Sean McDermott, but I can understand Terry's decision. This loss did hit different. I think this team does need a new voice. And essentially, that was what Pegula was talking about here and through some of the other clips that we're going to get to. And I agree. I think, again, I think McDermott's a great coach. I think he was a great coach. I think he did great things. The timing of him coming to the Bills was a godsend. Everything lined up. Coaching, front office with Beane and the front office that he developed. They had a great system going where McDermott on the coaching side had the farm system of the coaches and, churning through guys and teaching and cross training. Same with the front office. One of the better front offices for many years. Did it have some down years as of late? Yeah. But they're good farm systems and training, and guys have gone on to have prosperous careers, whether you're talking guys that the Bills coach or guys that were in the Bills front office. And so, that to me was my favorite part of the presser, talking about, that wall that they hit and the reason why. It wasn't just that loss to the Broncos. It was all of those moments, those heartbreaking losses, and him realizing, hey, we've possibly hit our ceiling I don't know if Sean is that leader to take us to the next level. And it's a risk. There's no doubt. We'll get to that. It's a risk.
Yeah.
No doubt about it. So let's go to the next clip that talks about, Pegula, confidence in Beane, and, some of the things that went on there.
That's our seeding over the last 7 years in the playoffs. 5, 2, 3, 2, 2, 2, 6. An organization doesn't carry that kind of record without being a great organization and without having great players. It's impossible to have that kind of results without having a good roster.
Jason, great point here. Still think the GM should probably have been relieved too. What's your take? Yeah, I thought that if they're going to fire the coach, you're going to fire the GM as well. But at the same time, again, I can justify, either side. McDermott was there first. Beane didn't pick him. This is his attempt to choose a coach. But when we're talking about the organization, again, I think he does a good job of delineating, again, what I was just talking about, the coaching and the roster building, the front office. And he's right, about they have been a great organization. I think they really have. And a lot of teams do compliment, a lot of franchises do compliment this team. A lot of your friends and that watch football are probably complimenting this team. Maybe it's not so much today, but, and so he was kind of flexing there a little bit, with the seating, and the joke is, you might as well just say 8, 6, 7, 5, 3.
Nice.
Yeah. But I do agree with him, when he says it's impossible to have the kind of results without a good roster. Yes, I think there is truth in that. And has the roster kind of fluctuated at times? Yes. But overall, I've always said, whether you're talking McDermott or you're talking Beane, they go hand in hand when it comes to roster building. They go hand in hand with development. And I think that he's right when he's saying they attract, good people, whether you're talking players or front office personnel. Guys always want to come back to the Bills when they leave and go to other places. But McDermott is also included in that roster building. I think that is one thing I took away from this, that maybe I think a lot of people were doubting when we're talking the story leading into this press conference. And so overall, I do think the teams have been good enough. And I say team, I always try to kind of separate, okay, is this a good roster? Is this a great roster? Is this a good roster, but a great team? Because they're two different things in my eye. And I think overall, Brandon Beane, and again, McDermott in there, have done a great job of creating and developing teams, not necessarily the best rosters.
Yeah, we talked about it, I think last week, just that notion of, yesterday when we did the emergency pod after the news of the firing came down. Yeah, I think for a lot of folks, great roster, or like how the roster's built, it usually, whether right or wrong, kind of gets put together with like top tier or like A tier high level talent. And I don't think that Bills have really been necessarily that, like a lot of teams that they come up against in the playoffs that have like multiple all pros or star-studded rosters or whatever.
Maybe early on in this regime, probably, right? There's more there.
And I think, but even through everything, like I do think they've been a well-rounded team. Like, do they have a ton of A+ guys or A's? Maybe not, but I think they've always had a bunch of B- to B+, where a lot of teams might be like, oh, now we got a C- or now we got a C. Like, you don't survive all the injuries every year and have all these depth guys come up and make plays if you don't have that to some level or some degree. That was really funny for that comment from Nelly. Appreciate you being here. Thank you for the super chat. He says the press conference name should be covered too, man. Fire Zone or Sean Fire. Yeah, and then this comment here, thank you for being here, first and 15th too. For being here, thank you for the super chat and saying it's the same reasons the Ravens fired their coach. It's time. Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with the firing of Sean McDermott. I've said it for like a while, and I do think there is validity to, like, is he the guy to get you over that hump? You think so? Cool. You don't think so? Cool. You can make a case either way. I have no qualms with it. And you kind of alluded to this as well, what I'm about to say, like in that specific clip from Pegula. I just felt like in that moment, or that specific clip, and a couple of things he said, it made it seem like the roster building and all the good stuff came from Beane, and almost like he kind of almost devalued or overlooked the coaching piece or the McDermott factor a little bit. Like even, we do having that roster and being able to get to these spots, he kind of credited it more for the roster building and the job that Brandon and his personnel did, and almost kind of overlooked McDermott's role in it, especially knowing how collaborative, as you talked about, it all is,
Right.
which Beane spoke about in this presser. Like,
Yeah.
and that was, I thought, was so muddy with everything. And part of why, to Jason's comment, why I thought they would both go, because both of their hands are bloody. Both of them are culpable in the shortcomings that have happened to this franchise with not being able to get there. McDermott on one end, Beane on the other, the overlap, the collaboration, all that kind of stuff. Which is why I thought, similar to you, if one of them went, they'd both go, because I thought they were both very or significantly culpable. Both had significantly bloody hands in these shortcomings.
Yeah. And my name is Jeff. Thank you for the super chat. I'm not going to say it in that voice. I'm sorry. Thank you.
I can't believe you did. My name's Jeff.
Thank you to all the guys at Cover. I already sang. That's enough. Thank you to all the guys at Cover One for your coverage of this. It's better than court-ordered therapy. A lot of times on our podcast, we do feel like we're a therapist, not just for you, but for ourselves, and especially in the film room when we're breaking down film. It always makes us feel better and or worse at times, but it is therapy nonetheless. We appreciate you for that super chat as well. And so let's move on to the next one. This is probably going to be a lengthy show, guys. So hopefully you have your beverages and your dinner.
Do you want to get to one more super chat before we get to this lengthy one then?
Send it.
We got another super chat again from Jason. Appreciate you, Jason. Thank you very much for being here. And the super chat again, Jason says, let's be clear. The Bills didn't lose this game because of the bad call and or lack of receiver talent. 5 turnovers did us in. We were on our way to a 14-3 lead. Jason referencing that James Cook fumble when he got popped by Alex Singleton that kind of started their way a little bit. Fair comment.
You're not wrong. And that's why we wanted to start this show off with, the context of it wasn't just the Denver game, right? It wasn't just a Denver game. It was all the calluses from prior games, prior playoff losses, and then just stacking and stacking and stacking. And really that rock became so big, it's anchored this team down in Terry Pegula's eyes. So Jason, appreciate that super chat. Keep the comments coming. Keep the questions coming, guys. We'll try to get to as many as we can. All right, let's go to the next video clip there.
Sorry, Terry. What process did you go through to evaluate whether coaching versus talent on the roster? Over time, how did you evaluate it? What process did you go through?
Well, you see teams in the league. I'm not going to mention team names, but they have a great year, a good year, and the next year the success doesn't continue. Like I say, you don't get in the playoffs 7 straight years in this National Football League where there are very few blowouts and dozens and dozens of close games every year. You don't get there without having talent and a great organization. And Brandon and his staff have brought in regularly players that look at the injuries we had this year. We're down guys on the practice squad contributing in big games. You don't do that without talent in the front office getting you there.
All right, so obviously he kind of oversold some of that, right? He oversold, the practice squad player. There's truth in it, but if those guys are playing, what's that say about your depth ahead of them? But it also says, how deep the injuries did hit the Bills this year. But I think overall, I think he is right. The roster helped them get to the playoffs regularly. But again, it's been a collaborative effort. It's not just the front office scouting, evaluation. The staff has a huge say in that. The staff's telling the front office what type of guys they need, what traits they need, what they need them to do, what systems they've played in. And so obviously it's a collaborative effort. But again, I think there was a little much by Pegula on this, but you could even see him kind of like cross his arms. He's like, I'm standing my ground. He's like, this is my guy right here.
Yeah.
So that's what that was.
The one that got me was the little vocal inflection in the face when he says regularly, like the brought in the talent. You can tell that he's starting to almost feel himself a little bit. This was another one, where he gave more of the credit it felt like he gave most of the credit for the Bills' success to Beane and the personnel or the front office side, and less or little to McDermott, to the coaching staff. And again, it is collaborative. We're going to say that word so much, like, and you can make a case either way. Like, you take anybody like Taron Johnson, right? Like, his success, is it because of the scout who ID'd him, or is it because of the coaching staff who coached him up or put him in the right position to succeed?
Right.
More often than not, it's both.
Yes.
And that's why I thought if you're going to get rid of one, you get rid of the other, because both of them are intertwined in so many ways. And Pegula, I think, trying to like separate that and make it seem like Brandon, that quote kind of made me think like him saying Brandon's done his job, Sean didn't, and kind of another reinforcing moment for that, which I don't necessarily disagree with. But again, that's his thought process, and that's again another more insight into how he's seeing it, what he's thinking, and the conclusion he came to.
Yeah, Jason says, I would have liked to have seen a little more respect put on McDermott's name. They didn't need to be that defensive. I agree. I think from the jump, the respect should have been there for McDermott. Whether we're talking how it ended, how the whole process of it, the handling of the PR side of stuff. I think McDermott was kind of dragged a lot in this situation. He didn't deserve it. And when they played that video, they actually finally released a video for McDermott from the Buffalo Bills handle, man, I'm not gonna lie, I teared up a little bit. And I also questioned myself if it was the right move, because after seeing that video, and again, we've been covering him for many years now. You guys have been fans of this team for many years now. We know the type of guy he is, the character, the high character, the discipline, the consistency, all those buzzwords. He is who he is. And that was what his teams, became. And we saw that. And again, maybe when it comes to not winning those big games, those are some of the reasons also why they couldn't win the big games. But I do think that, as Jason said, I think they kind of disrespected McDermott. And I think early on in this presser, I think they were on the defensive, and they were kind of flexing because of what was expected. I think I thought
they knew the temperature, they knew the tone, they knew it was going to be hot. They knew what was up. Right.
So let's get to this next segment then, because this is pretty interesting. I'll play the clip. This one's a couple minutes, so bear with us. But again, a very good lead into this discussion.
You don't do that without talent in the front office getting you there.
A big chunk of the fan base very frustrated with you specifically, dating back to that interview that you did on WGR 550. Thought it was very condescending, and I think that a lot of people have come out frustrated with you, particularly that you're still here and Sean isn't. I think a lot of it leads back to that. Do you regret that, and do you think in hindsight maybe not only the host but the fan base was kind of right about that assumption about the position?
It's a long probably answer for you, Matt. Listen, I'm a passionate person. I don't think that's new on anybody. And do I regret that? Probably the biggest regret is I probably put pressure on the wide receiver group when I reacted in that way, because I felt like they were being picked on unfairly. And if you remember, not trying to rehash what happened, but I was going, man, we had, the number 2 scoring offense, and we were just, we had some tweaks there. It wasn't the exact same group, but it was a similar group that we thought, an addition here or there. Even when I did that interview, I knew we were adding Elijah Moore later that day. And so it was probably more of a reaction to, we just had a draft of defensive guys that we thought could help this team get over the top. And it was more in the defense of that group. Do I regret how it's turned out? Sure. It was not meant to be condescending. It was me having a little bit of too much passion, I guess, if you want to say, hey, I shouldn't have done that. At the end of the day, it wasn't. I had nothing against those hosts. I think I did another interview with those guys. I've done them before. I did it at training camp when the next opportunity was. So it wasn't anything personal or anything like that. It was just more coming to the defense of our players because I felt like they were being picked on and they couldn't defend themselves at that point.
Okay, this is obviously a big one. This is where I think most of us think that the reputation, the ego became a thing. Like so many, this is when the narrative on Beane really started to change. You know, pro McDermott and really against Beane. This is when we started hearing, hey, McDermott's all of a sudden a great coach, and Beane, what's he doing? Why is he allowed to buy the groceries, right? And so the thing that I guess I didn't realize and really kind of frame as far as perspective goes was the fact that he went out and drafted all these defensive players because the Bills needed defensive help on that side of the ball. He felt like he was addressing what he thought were more pressing needs at that moment in time. And then, of course, he goes on this interview and they attack the wide receiver question and on WGR. And so he's like, okay, it's coming from that perspective. And so I don't think he was wrong. I don't think he was wrong when it comes to what he was saying as far as the offense goes, especially for guys like us that know that they're not necessarily a wide receiver centric team. They've been a run game, tight end, attack the middle of the field type team. I don't think it was necessarily wrong, but yes, that passion that he mentioned obviously took over. And then of course, like just little things like cursing is a little unprofessional when you're going on the flagship station. And so I think this is when really the tide started to turn for Beane as a GM. And then it was not good PR stuff there. And then from there on out.
No, it got picked up nationally. And then it felt like with each passing week where there were struggles with the receivers, everybody kept coming back to this moment. And I think that's part of it too, right? Not only that moment happened, but then how the year played out for the wide receiver room. Keon Coleman is like a healthy scratch, and Palmer is hurt. You have to bring in Cooks and Mecole Hardman, and then how the season ends, where like Cook's going to make,
and then McDermott's fueling that fire with his comments and pressers. And
he mentions Jacoby Myers, and everybody wanted Jacoby Myers, and all these little pieces.
We see why now, though.
A lot of things. I think that moment, I think, was a big watershed moment, and then especially how the season went. It could have gotten worse for Beane, but I think it just didn't go great after that. I think he did well in that moment there in that answer to try and play it politically and say the right thing. I still think he was more personally offended than it was like him defending his guys, just with the swearing in the moment. And I also understand that too. Like, you just came off a year where you had a tremendous year on offense. You've rebuilt the offense. You're sitting there in the green room, like waiting to get on the radio.
Everyone ate that up. Every fan ate that up.
Everyone's loving it.
We don't need Diggs. We don't need Davis. Everyone eats. We love the Mac Hollinses of the world.
Yes.
So we all ate it up. So I'll admit it. I ate it up. I got it. And so yeah.
And it got Josh an MVP.
It did.
And I think he was sitting there in the green room waiting to get on the radio, and he's just hearing Jeremy and Joe or whoever talk about like they didn't get any receivers. What's going on with the receivers? And I think he got on the air and lashed out immediately for it. And I do think there's probably some like having your players back. But I think I'm not completely on the ego train, but I do think in that moment he was more like individually annoyed. And I don't know if offended, but individually annoyed than anything. And that's why, because he didn't wait. He got on the radio and immediately was like he just like lashed out and let him know what's up. But it's, again, when you help put together a team that just had the year they had offensively, and then you've still got everybody and their mother being like, but I can see why he got offended and or annoyed. And I do think he did.
Yeah. And we have a super chat here that says they are human. They can make mistakes. In reference to Pegula. Pegula hasn't gone to his daughter's tennis matches, and Beane has to deal with his wife crying. Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing. When I'm on social media during the week leading into this press conference, and even during the press conference and after, I always try to look from the perspective of that person. For Beane, again, I expected Beane to be upright, forthright in a lot of his answers and be honest with a lot of his answers. I don't think he's the snake that everyone's painting him to be. I don't think he's as bad as he's painted to be. I think just like every other GM, there are ebbs and flows to drafts, evaluation, transactions. There's a lot of moving pieces.
Mhm.
And yes, at the end of the day, they all are human. And so we'll get to some of that later when we talk about, whether it's Pegula and his wife not having, his availability not being there all that often, or even being with his, character kind of being attacked.
Mhm.
But I'm not sure how to say her name, but
Yeah, I read it, and I'm not even gonna make an attempt, but we appreciate you.
AOF Gem. Appreciate
Sure.
you. Thank you for joining us here in the film room as we break down this press conference from today. All right, let's go on to the next segment here. This is a big one. This is another big one. We just put aside the WGR thing. This is probably the most viral one of the day when it comes to Keon Coleman.
Yeah, though the wide receiver position has been an issue with this team, and a lot of people out there believe you have failed in the free agent market, and then obviously with the Keon Coleman signing, which hasn't worked out. How do you answer the fact that you have not given Josh a good enough wide receiver room?
Yeah, I mean,
Can I interrupt? I'll address the Keon situation.
Uh-oh. Brandon Beane's like, oh no.
Yeah, right, dude. What are you doing?
What are you doing? Stop. Hey,
This was very I felt very Michael Scottish for him. It just from The Office. Terry was Michael Scott, and I think somebody who tweeted that, somebody
social,
it's just every time the camera was in on Beane, and then you would just hear Terry interject, it still makes me laugh.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go forward with this.
I'll address the Keon situation. The coaching staff pushed to draft Keon. I'm not saying Brandon would have drafted him, but he wasn't his next choice. That was Brandon being a team player and taking advice of his coaching staff, who felt strongly about the player. And, he's taken, for some reason, heat over it and not saying a word about it. But I'm here to tell you the true story.
The true story.
I love that. The true story gets me, and that he's taking heat over it for some reason. And that gets me too.
So again, I think we've established, or it's going to keep coming up, so I don't want to get hung up on these moments. Yes, Brandon Beane is a GM. Brandon Beane obviously officially chose Keon Coleman. Pegula there is obviously standing up for Beane, saying, hey, there were other people in there pounding the table for Keon Coleman to be drafted. And I think a lot of our insiders know that the story behind Keon Coleman. And so I don't want to put it on blast out there when it comes to the draft and things that occurred during the draft. And it's even come out, I think publicly, thanks to AP and John Walrow, that essentially it's not McDermott. It wasn't McDermott saying, hey, you got to draft Keon Coleman. It was someone on his staff. And I put out there on social that, I remember hearing two stories around draft time when it came to Keon Coleman, and they were not good stories about when they were, putting him through his workout. And so I was shocked, one, because we wanted separators and they drafted Keon Coleman. Yeah. And two, I had these stories and they still drafted him. And given Beane and McDermott's, DNA, I didn't expect them to draft Keon Coleman, but they did. And they did because they had someone on the staff that pounded the table for him. And again, everything's collaborative. They didn't make the choice. Beane made the choice. They collaborated. And obviously a lot of research goes into these prospects, right, Ant? And so Beane had him on his draft list, obviously, but they admit he was a little lower on that draft list. But and so let's listen to Beane's comments, and then I'll let you kind of respond to those.
Can you finish that answer, Brandon, on the receiver room, though?
Yeah. At the end of the day, Sal, it's some of it is the evolution of how you build your roster. If you look back to, let's go to the 2020, 2021, those before we paid Josh, okay, we made the move for Stephon Diggs, obviously paid him, Cole Beasley, John Brown, Emmanuel Sanders, drafted Gabe Davis. We were in a lot of 10 personnel. The game changes, it evolves. Some things don't change, but some things do. And so the league at that time was, and what our coaches asked for back when Brian Dable was here, was to spread things out. Okay. We want to spread these guys out and get mismatches. Well, then defenses started saying, okay, we're going to get smaller and more athletic. So we're going to bring things in. You've seen the last couple of years, we've been in more with more tight ends on the field, running the ball more. So there's just different iterations of how you score points.
All right, Ant, go ahead and talk about that. Obviously, he's talking about the collaborative effort of the coaching staff. Hey, we need this because this is what we want to do with 10 personnel. We used to love it. We used to love 10 personnel because then you'd have Gabe as that quasi tight end, moving around in the middle of the field. So talk about that and how that fits the whole, hey, we need to draft Keon when they started transitioning to the scheme that they've been kind of running under Dorsey and even Joe Brady.
Yeah, as Beane alluded to, the league offensively started moving into, okay, like defenses have, Bills are a good example, like too high structures and nickel defenses and lighter personnel on the interior and linebacker spot. And so it was like, okay, what are offenses going to do to swing the pendulum back? They're going to go with condensed formations. They're going to start to run the ball a little more. We're going to reduce our formational width, and we're going to get bigger body types at wide receiver. And this was very much in mold with, the Rams at the time. Young Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, both of those dudes who can block their butts off. You go to, at the time when the Bills made this offensive switch, which was the last offseason. And you look at the Lions at that time. Amon-Ra St. Brown could block like a menace. Josh Reynolds can block like a menace. Like all these receiver rooms, the Texans at the time with Nico Collins and bigger dudes there, like all these top offenses the Niners were doing. You could go on and on. It felt like a lot of the best offenses, and not even felt like, a lot of the best offenses from a DVOA standpoint, advanced metric standpoint, and tape standpoint, were reducing the formational width, getting bigger body types at wide receiver in the effort to marry the run with the pass, put defenses in a run pass conflict where, okay, is this guy going to block? Is this guy going to murk my nickel or my safety, or is he going to go out and run a route? And I think Keon Coleman, much like Matt Collins, was a guy in that mold where you've got these bigger body types at receiver who can mash a corner, can mash a nickel, can mash a safety, might even be able to like wash an edge down a little bit or catch them or crack on a linebacker, all in that mold of being able to put defenses into run pass conflict, dictate personnel and matchups, and then take advantage off of that.
Yeah, and as you can see, under 2020, under 10 personnel, again, 1 running back, 0 tight ends, obviously 4 wide receivers with the one running back there. 15.9% of the time they were in that look in 2020. And then you can see, obviously, as the years gone on, that percentage obviously dropped, and they were essentially adding more tight ends, more fullback looks, and that just limits how many receivers you get on the field. So they wanted to get those bigger body guys. They wanted a guy, we talked about it in several episodes, they wanted a guy that they could just throw it up to at times, right? And but still not be an issue in the run game, because Keon was a pretty good blocker coming out of college as well too. So it kind of, again, just adds some context to what he's talking about there when it comes to the evolution of their offense and where and why they were attacking certain ways and why they wanted to get a guy like Keon Coleman. So let me go ahead and get back to that clip, and we will finish it. I know it's a little longer, but it's a good one. It's the one that's going viral. We got to keep talking about Keon here.
And you have to, when you're paying Josh what you're paying him now versus what you were paying him in 2020, 2021, 2022, you got to make some sacrifices. And where we pick, we're not picking at the top. Okay. When you say free agency, like, I'm not sure what players that we could have acquired, that I've got to be able to afford them. Okay. So you're making selections. The number one thing I always want to do with Josh Allen is protect him. Okay. We've had an O-line that's gotten better and better, that also helped us have a leading rusher this year.
All right. And this one's big because I don't disagree with him. Protecting Josh Allen is the most important thing. Obviously, he's your franchise quarterback, but we understand that also, Josh, when he gets rattled and he gets pressured, obviously, like most quarterbacks, he's not as effective. He's not as accurate. And honestly, it starts to lead to hero ball and he starts pushing. So it's a cascading effect with him. So yes, they want to physically protect him in the pass game, but also you got to think about bringing in Aaron Kromer, that run game, that scheme, and his ability to adjust in game, drafting and putting together the offensive line and relying on Kromer to go scout a Connor McGovern and bring him David Edwards, another Kromer guy. Obviously, they're not going to be here next year as of right now.
Yeah.
Spencer Brown is developing and he starts to take that next step. He's a top 5 right tackle. Like that was the other portion of protecting Josh. You guys remember, there were games where we talked about, man, Josh was taxed. He was asked to do too much. He had no help. It was the run game and all those investments there that helped protect Josh physically, but also schematically, and getting that offensive line intact and the scheme, and then James Cook's development. That also helped, tax Josh less and really protect him and give him that breather that was a major talking point after the playoffs a few years ago, giving Josh a breather or two. And we saw that last week in that game last week. They couldn't run the ball, but even those runs that were getting 2 or 3 yards gave Josh a breather and allowed him to gather his thoughts so that he can make the plays in the passing game when they needed him.
Yeah, I thought the run game was so important to this team, obviously, but it was just a really good run game. And yeah, it makes everything so much easier for your quarterback, regardless if it's Allen or whatever team it is. And again, this was in line with league trends. Like teams were running the ball. Even as much as everybody's always
shells, later,
yes, run the ball for everybody. I know not, I won't say everybody in blanket statement, but I see so much all the time of like the people who are like, oh man, Shanahan or McVay, or now it's Clint Kubiak. You know how much those dudes run the ball? Like, you know how much like heavy personnel they go with? Like Kyle Juszczyk and Greg and George Kittle are like Shanahan's boys. He lives in like heavier personnel, like Kittle and Ross Dwelly. Ross Dwelly's on the field, or has been a whole bunch because of that. Like, look at what Clint Kubiak has been doing with Seattle with AJ Barner and Elijah Arroyo, and like the impact.
It's very similar. It's very similar to the Bills schemes and what they run, guys.
1000%. And then you go to the Rams this year, tons of 13 with Parkinson and Higbee and Ferguson, the rookie from Oregon. Like, moving that direction offensively wasn't just like the Bills plucked the idea out of a hat. That's where the league was going, and they did that. Now they swung it too far and didn't do the right stuff with receiver that they needed to, which I think is very fair and true. But the idea of building around the offense, or the offense around the run game and the offensive line and formational manipulation and dictation, is what the league was doing and what the Bills should do. And it's part of why Allen won an MVP last year. And it helped him a lot to take weight off his shoulders and put some of it onto Cook in that O-line.
And Jason makes a good point. It really isn't Josh's contract preventing wide receiver moves. It's being up against the cap because of other roster choices made on less certain players. Beane always gets away with the Josh's contract excuse. I believe that's true. There's truth to that. I also think that, there were a couple seasons there at the end of the season, the thing that we kept talking about, and it rings true this year, is the pass rush. And he's taken swings in the pass rush that haven't quite panned out, whether because of injuries. This year was injuries. Bosa wasn't there, obviously, when we're talking playing really well, and he did not pan out just from an on the field perspective. Michael Hoyt looked good, and then boom, he's gone in the blink of an eye. Obviously, Ed Oliver got hurt too, but I do think, some of those choices, yes, it affected the wide receiver position, and he, as Anthony said, I think he did kind of swing it too much in the in that direction. And some of the other choices he made, even the guys he did sign at wide receiver, didn't quite pan out for a multitude of reasons. So let's finish this Keon Coleman segment. Like I said, it was very loaded, and probably the most memed and mocked segment from this presser.
And so we want to be two-dimensional. We want to be balanced. If you look at some of the things offensively, numbers is how we rank. I think a year ago we were 2. This year maybe we dropped 1.5 points. We were 4th. I want number 1 receivers everywhere. I do.
Prove it.
But I also want to make sure, there's teams out there with number 1 receivers that haven't made it as far as we do. Maybe because their O-line's not as good. Maybe because they made, concessions on defense or other areas. You got to kind of make some concessions. But I promise you, we're looking. And to the point, I think it came up at the trade deadline when I came in here. We talked about some of the players that we tried to acquire. We're always trying to acquire them. Can I do better? Heck yeah. Heck yeah.
All right. So yeah, obviously, I honestly, I think he's going to take major swings.
Damn,
overall.
I'm really expecting him to like, not even like he's going to try and trade for like Justin Jefferson or do
He's gonna
something
make a splash.
crazy.
Yeah,
Like
I think
to
he's-
trying to prove and revamp. Yeah.
I think we told our insiders and the Discord channel, like, you guys have to brace yourselves. There's going to be some changes, and it's likely going to involve some names. But at the same time, I think Beane is really going to be aggressive and be passionate about improving this team and improving the weapons for Josh Allen. But again, we just wanted to add context. Yes, saying that about Keon Coleman, a guy that's on the roster, it's questionable. They were asked about it. They were honest about it. Pegula interjected when he probably should just kept his mouth shut, and Beane would have handled it just fine and wouldn't have been a laughable moment. But at the same time,
and Beane did kind of walk that back later. Like he said, like, we had a different order for Keon in the personnel room versus like the coaching room. He didn't say like, I didn't want Keon.
Right.
I think that was my,
I hate when people take that out of context.
Yeah. Like, and I even saw the thing of, people showing, the clip of Beane like eating at the combine and happy that Keon ran slow because he was like, oh, good, makes it easier to get him. Like, Beane it wasn't that he didn't want Keon. Like, he just maybe wanted somebody else. Not even maybe. He did want somebody else in that spot, or he had somebody higher than someone Keon.
Higher. Yes.
And that to me was such like it happens all the time. Everybody does that. It's in every single, like, oh, I like Timmy. Oh, I like Joe. Oh, I have Joe higher than Timmy. Well, I have Timmy higher than Joe. Okay, we have to come to some kind of consensus and figure it out. And so I thought
that moment bothered me. That moment bothered me when people are using that clip of, oh, he ran slow, like the Gabe Davis moment. Like, he ran slow. Good. Now we can, go ahead and pounce on him.
And even people running with the Terry piece, and which is understandable at the moment, right? Of making it seem like Beane didn't want Keon, but then Beane and Keon is Beane. Beane later clarified.
Yeah.
And he danced around it and walked it back well. So I think this got blown out of proportion. Obviously, it's a huge like gaffe in the moment, but I thought Beane walked it back later.
He did.
Yeah, and kind of added context to it of how it worked and what happened.
And it just, you got to understand, like Anthony said, he was lower on the list than the staff, which, again, you're talking about Brandon Beane, his staff have been scouting these guys for years, 2 to 3 years at least. And they have him listed somewhere. So he was lower on the list. The staff, and mainly the positional coach of the Bills, was really high on him, pounded the table for him. He was higher. And so, Beane collaborated, took their opinion, and drafted him where they did at 33.
And that's probably happened a ton the opposite way, right? Where like
100%.
The coaching staff is like, oh, I don't really like this guy, but Beane and the coach and the personnel grouping are pounding the table, and they're like, all right, cool, let's go with this guy. It's a two-way street. It works both ways.
And honestly, Beane was probably right. He had him lower on the list. He probably shouldn't have gone 33. He probably should have went, especially with that 40 score, where Beane probably had him again. So maybe that's even just a half a round difference, but that is really what he's just saying there. I mean, that stuff happens all the time.
He literally quoted later. He said, ultimately, I'm not turning in a pick for a player I don't think we can succeed with. So don't misunderstand that. It's all collaborative. Yeah, I felt like that really got, of all the things to take and run with. I understand because it is very memeable and very eye catching and engagement baiting. But I thought it was a little much for that.
Beak716 says, thank you. The use of that clip was so dirty by Bills media on Twitter today. It was a cheap shot. Yeah, I just, here in the film room, we try to add context. And when people, whether they're just fans, media, analysts, whatever, when they take things out of context, especially if they don't cover the team, they don't know the little details that went into drafting a Keon Coleman, it's annoying for us. And so that is one thing that really makes, I know, my blood boil, taking things out of context, but it's an engagement type world now. So, I mean, I get it.
I understood it in the moment because like if you're watching the presser right when it happened, it's like, oh my God. Like, so I get it. But the fact that, because the presser happened at 10, right? And it was over by 11. I didn't start watching it till 11:45. So I had to work. And when I like started listening to it, the Keon stuff was still bouncing around. And that to me, I was like, but if you listen to the whole presser, you still shouldn't be on this thing. So I understood it in the moment of being like, oh my God, I can't believe he said that. But then the context was added later. So I didn't get why it continued to be a thing.
And then Adam Schefter tweeted it, and all these outlets tweeted it, and just
over.
wildfire. It's just no way you're getting ahead of that. All right, let's get to the next clip here about the firing and Josh's input on the firing.
How important Josh is to this franchise, and how seeing him after the game was a factor. What input did he add, if any, on this decision to fire Sean, or what conversations have you had with Josh Allen?
He didn't have any input at all. I didn't talk to Josh about this. I talked to him afterwards, and that conversation will stay private, but he had no input in it.
All right, so this is a big one. Obviously, asking Josh's input prior to the firing. How does he feel after? A lot of that was kind of canned up, and I thought Pegula was smart to do that and not really release it, because that would have been the headline for this entire presser. But I wanted to talk about it because I had gotten some info about Josh being angry about the firing. And so, again, there are different ways to attack. Okay, he's angry, but what's he angry about? And so I was told that he was angry. So I cross-checked, asked a couple of sources to look into it. And they did. And they confirmed that Josh was angry about how it was handled. Understandable. Again, the Bills botched this. They botched it all after the fire. They botched everything about it. I'm not denying that. So I went back and I'm like, hold on. Okay, he was angry. He's angry about how they handled it. Man, I totally get that. Pegula eventually went out and said that he didn't tell Josh about it beforehand. So that, again, that kind of puts down some of the rumors that we saw on social about, hey, Josh was consulted beforehand.
Yeah, Josh signed off on it.
Yeah. And, he's mad about them, firing McDermott. So I think I think overall Pegula doing that and kind of like not asking the opinion of Josh so it doesn't fall at his doorstep. I think that was kind of smart. And I especially think it was smart that he didn't really share Josh's opinion afterwards.
Yes.
About how he felt about the firing.
Yeah, like how he said that, it was personal, so I'm going to keep that personal. And I always think it's a real slippery slope with the whole like quarterback input or star player input on things. Like, and I get, like, if you wanted to play one side, like, oh, he should have checked with Josh because Josh is the MVP, leader of the team, whatever. But also, like, you're still the owner and the shot caller, and if you want to do something, do it. Like, it's tough. It's a slippery slope to like give one player that much influence or power, but I also do understand if you give one player that much influence and power. Yeah. So you could make a case either way. I wouldn't have had any problem. Like if he went to Josh ahead of time, cool. If he didn't, cool. But I do, to your point, I do like that he kept it personal, especially after a little bit before he literally was like, Brandon didn't want Keon. The coaching staff took Keon. And it's like, dude, why would you say something like that? I like now that he was like, oh, I'm going to play this close to the vest. I'm glad he wasn't like, yeah, I told him, and this is what he said after. I'd be like, oh my God. Yeah. So I at least
I wonder what Beane was thinking when this was like, he was heading that direction. He was like,
yeah.
He's like, oh my God.
Don't say what Josh said.
Don't go there.
Do that. Yeah. Oh my God. I can't. I imagine every time Pegula was speaking, Beane was just like, oh my God, like waiting for him to. Yeah, exactly. Just waiting.
And I like that he didn't involve him with the firing per se, but I also appreciate that he admitted and both of them stated that Josh is going to be involved with the selection of the next coach. His opinion is going to matter.
They said, to your point, quote, Allen will be part of the team to help select a new coach. He's going to be working with us, end quote.
Yeah, I like that. Obviously, I said it yesterday on social media. I go, isn't it kind of scary and interesting to think about how every decision this franchise has made, essentially from the time they drafted Josh and prior to drafting Josh, has been about Josh? And I don't mean that in a bad way. Everything that they're doing, including this firing of McDermott, has to do with Josh. It really comes down to is that Josh and the Bills offense have put up X amount of points. Sean McDermott
To that point, Beane early in the press conference said, quote, "We have an MVP quarterback and we've got to get him, we've got to help him get to the Super Bowl and bring a championship to Buffalo." He led off that early with like, "We've got this guy, we have to help him."
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that it makes sense. Everything is about Josh. And just real quick, because I sent this to our insiders on the Discord channel. If you guys aren't insiders, like you're missing out. You know, a lot of the nuggets and stuff that we get from little birdies and sources, you know, we put in the insiders Discord channel, and then just stuff like this. Like there's a lot of stats here. And I
run
pulled,
defense and pressure is killing.
Yes, Bills defense since 2020 in the regular season and then in the playoffs. You can see those columns and you can see the differences under McDermott, his defense in the playoffs versus the regular season. And obviously, you know, relative to the league in the playoffs, the defense does not do as well. And I haven't added a little column that I know our guy Jason appreciated in the Discord server and what it shows in the far right column. And so if you guys aren't insiders, you're missing out. Get into the Cover One Discord channel. In the end, what this shows is that in the playoffs, when you're against very good teams and very good quarterbacks, very good passing games, very good run games, the Bills defense suffers much, much more than they do in the regular season. So with that said, let's get on to the next clip here. I think
Pegula's face is always just, I don't know why. You just get me at everything. Like just, I don't know why. It just makes me laugh every time.
All right. I think this one is about the relationship between Beane and McDermott. And this one's important because we heard a lot of leaks from the media,
the disconnect,
insiders,
the dissolving relationship.
Yes, between Beane and McDermott. And I will say, I heard rumors and I was told stories that this was the case from a year ago, starting a year ago, what I mean. And again, you have to take these things with a grain of salt because collaborative things, even at Cover One, all of us in our chat, man, we go at it sometimes. We don't always agree. We collaborate, but we also have our own voices. And so any good business obviously has those issues. And so this was kind of the story going in. And you had what people thought Beane's camp was leaking stuff to insiders. We had McDermott obviously leaking stuff. And so it felt like there was a divide. But listening to these, you know, this segment here and other segments, maybe it was overplayed a little bit. There probably was, again, naturally, as is usually the case, especially with this structure where McDermott and Beane are kind of reporting to the owner. So this was kind of interesting to me and really kind of put me in my place too. Cause again, I had been hearing about this kind of divide and, you know, erosion of a relationship over the last year.
And specifically throughout the season this year with Sean. And I ask you that because the perception from the fan base out there is that this was some kind of power play made by you to still be here in Sean now.
Yeah. As Terry said, there's disagreements all throughout, way before this year. It's not like we were 100% always in agreement on every decision that he made or I made. That just comes with the territory, and I wouldn't expect that with the next head coach. There's certain things that fall in his area, whether it's managing a game, how we scheme a game, whatever it is that are his, and then there's certain decisions that personnel related, somebody's got to make the final call. What was the saying about?
Can I help him a little?
Oh no.
Can I help you about the power play part of that?
Can I help? Can I help him?
Can I help?
He doesn't need help, Terry. I'm sorry. Props to you for standing up for your guy, but man, just let him talk.
I'm the kind of guy, if I sense you're on a power play, you're out.
Is that a hockey reference?
You know what's funny is I was like, the Sabres have struggled at times so much with their power play unit, and I was like, this is such a meme. Like, anytime the Sabres don't do good on the power play now, I'd be like, if someone's pulling this out. Yeah, 1,000%.
I don't like power play people. We have an organization we work together, but any sense at all that he was on a power play, he would have been gone.
And
because that's not my kind of person.
And Joe,
and I actually agree. I believe that. Beane doesn't seem like that type of guy. And, you know, when it comes to who has the owner's ear, more times than not, regardless of the structure, it is the GM.
Oh, yeah.
It is a GM that is talking to the owner several times a day at times because of little things. It could be day-to-day stuff, salary, transactions, any little thing that happens at the facility, Beane is the one that really reports it to the owner, and McDermott is dealing with the team stuff. And so
and probably watching
naturally,
the games with him too, and
that's what Tim Graham,
and
yes.
everything.
Yeah, Tim Graham said that Beane actually watches the games with Pegula. And so I'm sure Beane and whoever's watching the game with him they're making comments just out loud, not even directed at him, and he's picking up on all this stuff. So
You see a guy who dropped that pass, Terry. I didn't want that guy. Sean wanted that guy.
Yeah, no, right. So I hated the way it was painted, because I don't see Beane as that guy, and I feel like we kind of got that drift as this segment went on.
Like, that's hurtful to even hear that or say that. Like, I worked 19 seasons starting as an intern in Carolina and worked my way up. I came here and I've never tried to do that. I would love for anyone who's making that accusation to walk in these doors and ask any person, player, coach, trainer, anyone. Like, people can disagree with draft picks that I make or people I sign, or I screwed up the wide receivers, whatever it is. Like, those are harmful things that, you know, I walk in the door and my wife's got tears coming down her face for stuff like that. And I'm going to damn try hard to win a Super Bowl here. I am. But for somebody to question my character like that, it is BS. And I've never done that. If you'll remember, in 2023, there was an article written on Sean accusing things. Who stood up in front of every one of you guys and defended him and his family, everything he's done here?
I mean, and that's what was interesting to see. We're talking social media, so again, this is kind of a rabbit hole, but when that Tyler Dunn article, very well done by him, many sources, came out, and that's what, you know, Beane is referencing here. It's funny to see all these dots being connected now. Like, oh, I bet you Beane was one of those sources. Stop it, guys. That's how bad it got this week, and I almost had to start avoiding social media because Beane did not give him information like that, and to make himself look better and make McDermott look so bad. I don't think that was the case, and so.
And
I think this is genuine.
He seemed genuinely upset. Like, it kind of looked like he got choked up, or almost got teary-eyed a little bit. Again, he could be an amazing actor. This could all be, he could have been planting those seeds maybe in 2023 for the long con. But yeah, I took this as genuine. And this kind of all put more into me that, I don't know, Beane came into the office on Sunday or Monday, and Terry was like, "Hey, Brandon, I'm going to fire Sean." And they walked back out of the office, and Brandon was like, "I'm sorry,
we're
what?"
Going to talk about that. Yeah, we're going to talk about that. That's a good one. Padden, appreciate you. Also an insider. The Beane perception exists because the organization failed both McDermott and Beane. Completely botched process. I don't think Beane is a bad guy. Totally. And the thing is, like, yes, they botched the meeting with McDermott, the firing, the PR stuff when it came to,
I would say, stuff that was being leaked after about both guys, both camps. Yeah, it was just all,
I also want to put in perspective, Beane spoke today on Wednesday, and last year, and typically the end of year pressers, from what I was told, typically happen on Thursdays when the game's on Sunday. Well, the game was on Saturday. That's why he spoke today on Wednesday. And so there was a large gap between the game ending, Pegula making that decision to fire McDermott Monday morning, and the 10 o'clock press conference this morning. So yeah, a lot of things were swaying in the McDermott direction, whether they're true or false. A lot of things were really anti-Beane, and I thought overall that Beane did a good job. But I agree, Padden, that the perception exists because the PR department of the Bills, including social media that is controlled by that, really failed McDermott. They really failed Beane. And so, yeah, I think, honestly, if anything needs to be evaluated, just saying, probably should be that. So, all right, let's go forward with this, finish this segment on Beane kind of defending his character here.
And then we went to Kansas City, and we won that game. And I went down to Jeff Missouri and said, "Give me a game ball. I'm going to show everyone that this team has his back. I've done nothing but have everyone's back. And so for someone to question my character, my integrity, that's where I draw the line.
Listen, and you guys know we've worked on contracts for players on this team. And I've never spoke directly to Beane, but everyone that I was a part of in these groups to work on contracts never said anything bad about Beane. Beane is super fair when it comes to contracts, and he's honestly very upfront. So I kind of, he comes off genuine here. I do kind of believe him when he says that. I don't think he was, Littlefinger, Game of Thrones. I don't think he was that guy really orchestrating that, because that would be quite the scheme that he's hatched. And he probably, if that were the case, he failed a few times, because that rallied that team when that Ty Dunn article came out. That team rallied.
Yeah, it actually helped them.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, I saw a lot of the people taking some of the images, like the old Big Baller Beane images, and like putting it on graphics that said like snake.
Yeah.
It got really intense, and yeah, I could have seen it happening, but I also just wasn't sure. I think this presser really quelled a lot of that for me, at least. And yeah, my issues with Beane aren't like, oh, is he a snake? My issues are more just like, all right, how are we building the roster? And I could see to his point, like, man, that's a tough thing to go through. Everybody's calling you a snake and a liar and a backstabber and all these things. And it, we're making jokes about it, but yeah, that's got to be a brutal thing to deal with. And again, like you said, and like Padden said, I really think it was just so mishandled from an organization standpoint on the McDermott side, on the Beane side, how it went down. Again, even in this presser, Pegula is saying things and Beane is having to walk it back. Like, I feel like that kind of might even be in the day-to-day. Like, I could see Terry doing stuff and Beane has to be like, whoa. Like, what? Or like this or that. Yeah.
What's funny about that too is, like, now you can kind of understand, maybe not appreciate, but understand why Beane kind of got that promotion with the president of football operations. Because now, these are things that, he can deal with, and that Pegula is obviously kind of handing off responsibilities to Beane. He's going to be handling a lot of the things that Pegula and his family had to deal with. And of course, they have not only another franchise, but a lot of things going on personally, as he said. So maybe that's part of the reason why he was promoted. But let's move forward to Brandon Beane, the GM, and the situation that happened with Jamarcus Ingram. Was not fun. Obviously played a big part in that Broncos game when Dane Jackson was in there for that one play. So let's talk about, let's listen to what they had to say about that whole situation unfolding.
Terry, you mentioned the conversation with Josh after the fact, after your decision. I understand your desire to keep that private, but is the starting core?
All right, that's not it, obviously. Let me go to the next one.
We're always, Sean and I always talked about areas of concern where we're deeper as the season goes along. You obviously face injuries, and at that point in the season, Dorian Strong was out. Maxwell had come back, but we're still kind of working him in there. And you're going, all right, if Trey or CB or one of those guys goes down, the next guy is Jamarcus. We think Darius Slay, with his history, his pedigree, would be a good guy. We're trending towards the playoffs here. And so we talked about it. And Sean and his coaches watched him. We talked about, the pros and cons to doing it. And we ultimately decided to do it. And I always remind the coaches, you have, hey, hopefully we can get Jamarcus back on practice squad, which we had hoped that we could. But anytime you release a player, you have to assume one of 31 can claim him. Now, when we claimed Darius Slay, we had no idea that he had the intent to only play for one team. And when the way the rules work, listen, I would have loved when I found that out to push him back and say, all right, we're unaware of that. Give us Jamarcus back so that we don't lose both. But that's not the way the rules work. And so Houston put a claim in, and we decided, once we learned about what Darius' situation was, to bring in Darnell Savage, who was released a couple days later. and we ended up needing safety depth. So, Jamarcus, we love him and didn't want him to go, but he had also been inactive for a number of games. You're just trying to constantly, incrementally look for pieces on your roster. A very weird thing that happened, but that was not done rogue, let's just say.
Obviously, the collaborative thing comes up in this segment as well. And again, it's an unfortunate thing that happened for the Bills because it kind of was one of those cascading effects, that kind of hurt the Bills and really cost the Bills a touchdown. With Dane Jackson being in there.
But you also do, if you want to play devil's advocate, like Max Hairston was out, which is why Dane Jackson had to play, and Max Hairston was in because he was playing in that Jets game. Like, do you want to blame McDermott? Do you want to blame Beane? I think certain things, I feel like it's just unfortunate luck or timing with how.
And he said it too. Down. He said Ingram was inactive for several games as well. So it's and to me, it was Beane trying to get out ahead of any type of injury in the playoffs because he talked about marginally improving the position. Yeah. Darius Slay, a very proven, type player in the playoffs. If they're in the playoffs, they had the option to pick between Ingram and Slay. They were going to go with Slay. And I think that's what he was talking about, marginally improving the position. But again, it was unfortunate the way it unfolded. It really did kind of screw them in the playoffs. Of course it did.
Of course.
All right. Let's see.
And even with that too, one more little bow on that, because we didn't talk about it a ton after it happened. He said they didn't know at the time he only wanted to go back to Philly. I remember seeing that in the time where everybody was like, he should have known that. How come he didn't know? You can't contact the player or the agent beforehand. It's the same thing with tampering. Like, you can't do that. Yeah, if you want to play again devil's advocate and be like, there's ways around that, blah, blah, blah. They didn't know he only wanted to play for Philly. Like, they wouldn't have risked the player if they thought that was going to happen. Or I shouldn't say that. Maybe they would have still, but you can't reach out to his agent, Drew Rosenhaus, and be like, hey, we're about to claim Darius. He's cool coming to Buffalo, right? Like, no, you can't do that. So that's also part of like how that works. It's same thing as like free agency. You can't talk to that guy until he's out there, which is getting him on waivers.
And the worst part is watching the Eagles game and seeing Darius Slay come out of the tunnel waving with his
him doing that, and then even before, Buffalo's cold, like I can't play. Yo, my man, you played in Philly, Pittsburgh, and Detroit. Like, what are you talking about? Like, you act like you've never. I've never disliked a player that never impacted or never played for the Bills like that, or should have been a Bill. That frustrated the hell out of me. The way he handled that was terrible, and they wouldn't have risked that had they known. But you can't talk to the player or the agent beforehand, because that player's still on that team until they clear waivers. And once they clear waivers, then you've been awarded. So it wouldn't have happened like that.
All right, let's get to this next clip. Terry, he looks like he's about business right here.
All the faces, man. Yeah, look at him. He's ready. He's ready.
It was a reflection of the roster that they had to play so many guys deep down the depth chart because of injuries. But they kept winning football games. So why was that also not a positive reflection on Sean McDermott's coaching?
Again, I go back to 5-2-3, 2-2-2-6. Great roster, good coaching, no Super Bowl appearance. And I can't emphasize, if I can put you all in that room at that moment after the game, it's like, how do we overcome this? It's been one year after another. And that it was the sense of, how do we overcome this? And I just couldn't see us doing that with Sean. That's why I relieved him. It's not an easy decision, trust me, with that success. But what is success? Is success being in the playoffs 7 years in a row with no Super Bowl appearance?
He doesn't know. He honestly doesn't know. Yeah. He admits this is a huge risk, and he's right. It's for me. I'm the type of fan that this is a gravy train. Like, them making the playoffs every year, that to me, they're a successful franchise. They're a successful organization. To win a Super Bowl, it takes a lot. It takes a lot of luck as well. A lot of things have to line up. And so to me, they have been successful. He doesn't think that way. and that's okay. That's probably why he's a billionaire. All right. And so he believes that he can change things up, fire McDermott to get them over the hump. He could be wrong. He could be right. But in his eyes, they hit that wall and they want to go in a different direction. And he believes that Beane could help them, lead them on this coaching search to find that proper coach, a new leader to get them over the hump, to get them to a Super Bowl. And he didn't even say win the Super Bowl early in the presser. He said 0 appearances in the Super Bowl. So get him into the big game because he believes in Josh, as we do. All of us do.
I thought this was the most important part of the whole presser. Just because this is as succinct as he could have made it. He boiled it down, like what he thinks, rightly or wrongly, whether you agree with him, whether you don't. This is what his reasoning was. He thought they had a great roster and good coaching, but they couldn't make the Super Bowl. And then he goes into that Denver locker room. He sees everything happening and what has unfolded and everything from prior years that he had talked about earlier in this presser. And he thinks to himself, like, how can we overcome this? So year after year of these disappointing losses, like, how do we overcome it? And he's thinking to himself, however we overcome it, I don't see Sean McDermott as the one helping us overcome it. And that's, again, whether you agree or don't, that's what it boiled down to. For me, I don't know how you can say that. I don't know how you can solely hone in on Sean, knowing how, again, collaboration and how involved Beane has been. Right. So kind of doing that, and he gets asked about it after. But yeah, I thought this was the most important part of the whole presser because he gets down to the brass tacks of it for him. Whether you agree or don't, that's what his decision was. He didn't think McDermott was the guy to get them over the hump.
Brandon, to clarify, will the new head coach be reporting to you?
Yes.
And then with your new role, would you look at hiring someone to have the GM role and you take on more of the football ops role from a bigger perspective, or are you planning on keeping both roles?
No, I'll be the GM. It's not. It's a very similar. You're going to see. We're going to operate very similar that we've been doing.
That killed my theory. I thought he would hire or just promote.
I was thinking that too. Like, I was kind of like, okay, so you're still going to stay president. You're going to stay president of football ops and GM. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I think the whole title addition of president of football operations, obviously there's responsibilities that come with that. But I think just that vertical structure and that realigning, probably Pegula thought that he deserved a new title or probably even a raise for that matter. But that was interesting because that was a theory when we were live.
Yeah.
After the firing of McDermott, that was one of the theories that I thought maybe could.
So then now it's more just like, hey, we essentially wanted to realign and make everyone report into him, no matter what, coaching staff, whoever. So that's why we did the title change and the bump, all that type of deal.
Yep.
You were talking to Joe specifically, but there is a section of the fan base that will say the wrong guy was fired, and that would be an indictment more on the roster than on the coaching. What would you say about the roster and the people that think this roster is not good enough, and that's why this team has fallen short?
Matt, like, I believe in our players. Okay, is there things that I can do better? Yes, we're always looking to improve our roster. Back to the Darius Slay thing. It's a 12-month process. Okay. I'm always going to defend our players. Okay. I'm not going to sit up here. It's up to Terry to decide who's the head coach, who's the GM of the Buffalo Sabres, the Buffalo Bills. You'd have to ask him on the decision he made. That's not me.
Okay. This is a good talking point on the decision he made. So are you thinking what I'm thinking when it comes to, did Beane actually even pull the trigger here? He didn't have much of a say.
This is another breadcrumb of what I said earlier that you picked up on. Like, I feel like he just showed up to the office and Terry was like, knock, knock. I'm firing Sean today. Like that. Yeah.
That's honestly a question. I mean, we all know the owner, he's going to call the final shot.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Beane was consulted about it. At least I would assume he was in the know and actually at that firing, but it does make you wonder because for all the stuff leading into this, again, he took power play by Beane. Like, I don't know how you can say that now when it makes you almost wonder that, hey, Pegula made this decision, came in and told Beane about it, and he's like, all right, let's go in the office and do it, type of, basically how it unfolded. It's kind of weird.
That, like, not to get too off like topic with it, like I've been part of those situations in my day job, like climbing the ladder and things. Like, I've had my boss show up and be like, hey, you got a minute? And I'm like, yeah, what's up? And it's like, oh, we're gonna fire so-and-so. And I'm like, what? And then, like, you're in for that conversation and you're sitting there like, oh my God, like, I can't, like, if your boss makes the call, your boss makes the call. And I think that little piece too, as well, like, as much as athletes or, you know, celebrities and football teams and people who work in those organizations are put on pedestals, like, it's still just day jobs and essentially like corporate work structure. Like, sometimes your boss does something you hate and, you know, pulls the trigger and you just have to go along with it because that's your job and that's what you have to do. Like, sometimes it's not your call. Sometimes you have input. Sometimes you don't. These are still, you know, people's, they make a lot more money and it's a lot more high profile, but there's a lot of the same work dynamics that we as regular people have in our day-to-day lives. And I also want to mention that too, is kind of a thing of like, these people are also people with jobs. So I know there's people in the chat who are like dancing on McDermott's grave for him being fired. And like, that's classless and garbage. Like, he's still a person and he has a family and he got fired from his job. And I just think that's whack to be happy about somebody losing their job and like crapping on him when he's down. I think that's garbage.
I think the point that he was making was, we've made the playoffs 7 straight years. We've won at least one playoff game in 6 straight years. Couple AFC championship. We're not like one of those teams where you get to the playoffs. Like when 2017 we made the playoffs, where our talent was then and what we were doing, we were excited to make the playoffs, hoping to win a game. We've put ourselves in position each year, a lot of division titles. We didn't win it this year, but we were right there with the number 1 team again this year. We can sit here and defend it all day and go back and forth for hours, this or that. At the end of the day, I believe in our group, and it's up to us this offseason to make the right changes, the right tweaks after we get this head coach and see if we can get this thing over the top. Any issues we have, put it on my shoulders. I own it all.
And that's, you know, that's what he does every single year at these end of year pressers. He's honest, he's transparent, and at the end of it, he does hold himself accountable. And much like McDermott, you know, in the offseason, you see McDermott and Beane, they self-reflect, and when it comes to the roster or coaching decisions, they self-evaluate, you know, and self-scout, as we like to say here in the film room. I don't think Beane is any different. And again, I think he does hold himself accountable. I don't know where people get that idea that he doesn't, but this was an interesting segment to kind of, you know, cap off this presser, because it does make you wonder, you know, if Beane actually wanted McDermott fired, or if he would have been like, yeah, let's run it back, or he said, let's run it back. We really don't know. We really don't know. It was really Pegula's decision for right or wrong.
Yeah, there's a couple times where he said it throughout this presser where he referenced like his decision or Terry's call. And that made me really, again, could be reading into it too much, but that really made me think it was Pegula. Just, again, he probably likes Beane maybe more than McDermott, or he values him more because maybe he really does think the roster's great or thinks Beane has done a great job, or just because they have more face-to-face interaction or whatever, or they're buddies. I don't know. But I really do feel like he was like, yeah, like, I'm going to fire Sean. And then Beane is like, oh, like, okay. And then it's like, what do you do? Like, shape up or ship out? Are you going to push back? And maybe he did, for all we know. Beane could have been like, no, I don't think this is the right decision. We should keep Sean. And maybe Terry was like, tough cookies, like he's out. Or maybe Beane was just fell in line right away. Like, we don't know. But yeah, this whole thing really made me think that it was more of purely Terry's call. Again, he saw what he went to the locker room. For better or for worse, he felt the vibes. He added it up with all the other failures, and it just kind of hit him in his brain. Like, I don't think Sean's the guy to do it for us. And then he made the decision.
All right. So that kind of answered the first question from one of our insiders. So I had our insiders throw us some questions in a document. That was the first one. Did Beane have any say in the McDermott firing, or was it all Pegula? He went rogue from one of our insiders. So second question, and I'll let you lead this off. Do we trust Beane to hire a coach more than Pegula to hire a new front office after this press conference?
Yes, I trust Beane to make better football decisions than Terry Pegula.
Yeah, that's fair.
I was gonna make a mean joke, but yeah, that's where I stand. I'm not gonna get too off the rails here.
All right, Pegula referenced regular season success, parentheses playoff seeds, as a reason to keep Beane. Do you agree with this premise? With the premise that the regular season success is shared between a GM and head coach, but the playoff success or failures tilts more towards a head coach? Jason, not Jason M, the other Jason from our Cover One.
That's a great
Discord.
question.
Yeah, this one's fun because I kind of flashed some of those numbers, when it comes to, the defense of McDermott.
And they are significant. It's a significant drop off regular season versus playoffs.
Right. And so, yeah, the Bills for many years, especially the years that Beane was referencing about winning the division, right? The AFC East and 5 times in a row. You're playing against, at those times, were some bad teams. And when McDermott got to the playoffs, the defense would give up big plays, even bigger plays, and, allow more points. And, a lot of things would fall off the rails at times on defense. And, aside from this last loss against the Broncos, Josh was always putting up. He was always showing up. But the defense at a lot of the times couldn't hold up their end of the bargain. And there are times where I think Pegula even referenced it, when it comes to like some of those close games where, some of the decisions from the staff, and it showed up in the Broncos game too.
Yeah.
You're going to be aggressive at the end of the first half with 16 seconds left against the second ranked defense on the road when no timeouts. You're going to be aggressive. Why, Sean? Why are you doing that? So I think there were moments in the, over the course of McDermott's career where in the playoffs, he didn't show up, whether it's a strategy or a game plan perspective, but especially the defensive side of things. I always liken, this divorce to being that Sean McDermott couldn't be the Belichick for Brady. Sean McDermott couldn't be the Belichick for Josh Allen. That is kind of the way it was set up. Josh always put up, and of course he had moments, but in the playoffs, it was playoff Josh, as we always reference. And there were a lot of times that McDermott's defense couldn't be like Belichick was for Brady.
Oh, yeah. I've talked for a bunch of years of the just my frustrations at times schematically and identity and philosophy wise with the Bills defense. I think the playoffs is a good example, just not being as matchup based or as front foot based and kind of letting it come to them more than kind of attacking. And I do think, them getting that, even though it's just one play, but like them getting the turnover to end the Jacksonville game and then seeing how the defense played in the second half against Denver. And when the Bills scored and went up, when they only get the field goal because Allen skips the pass to Shakir. Yeah, when it's 27-23, in my head, I was kind of like, not even like, I literally said, this is the moment where the defense can finally shut everybody up. Yeah. And it's like, you only gave up 3 points the whole second half, and that's because Allen turned it over on the first drive. You turned around, you stood it up, you did it, and Denver marches down, obviously takes the lead, and then the Bills tie it, and then you go to OT, and the offense doesn't do what they need to do. The defense falters with some help from the refs, maybe or maybe not. I thought that drive was so impactful. Obviously, it helped decide the game, but yeah, I thought that was a moment for McDermott or the defense to kind of really stand up and do what they haven't done over the years, which was answer and step up where they needed to. And I do think to that original question, I still think, because what you do here echoes in eternity, but what you do in the regular season still matters come playoff time. Yeah. So what you built roster wise still matters, but I do think there is a little more matchup based element come playoff time. There's a reason everybody in the Chiefs come playoff time talks about Andy Reid and Steve Spagnuolo, and they're not like, Brett Veach, like, because I think it falls a little more on the field piece.
Patton, thank you for that super chat again. Take comfort knowing that somewhere in the multiverse, Anthony and I were succeeding in advocating for Edmonds. Our defense improved, and we have multiple Super Bowl wins. Thanks
I saw
again,
the
guys.
Edgeman's hashtag and laughed immediately. I didn't even start to read the rest. I just saw Edgeman's. That's hilarious. Well done, Pat.
You guys are awesome. Thanks for sticking with us. Jason Brown, appreciate that super chat once again. You guys have been awesome here in the chat. Got a couple more questions. We're going to get you out of here. We know we ran a little late. Ant, here's a good one for you. Was there anything said in the presser that hints at what direction they are looking for the next head coach? That's a question thanks to our insider, Brian.
Oh, great question. It's funny. Beane kind of gave a general answer of, what they're looking for in the coaching search. And he kind of hit like all the gamuts, right? Open process, no front runner, like old coach, former coach, young coach, first time coach. We're open every door. What I did think was maybe a little interesting, and this might be me reading too much into it, but he talked about at the end, one of the last things he said, like, bringing in a new coach and we got to evaluate the personnel. And he was like, for example, he's like, I'm just making this up, but if we bring in like a 3-4 defensive coach, like, do we have the right personnel? Do we have the, and that might be just me thinking too much, but I was like, that's interesting that that's the first example you went to. And so that made me think like, okay, like, are they going to bring in a defensive guy? Is it more of a 3-4 guy? Is it a little more Chris Shula, Jesse Minter type of deal, more odd front structure type of defensive guy? That one perked me up a little bit. But it could have just been a basic level example that he was picking because it's low hanging fruit. But that was one that perked me up.
Yeah. And then I think that was in a segment talking about the roster too, and how that the choosing of the coach or selection of the coach kind of also hinges on, what type of scheme that they play, whether it's 3-4 or 4-3. And obviously that's going to affect and limit sometimes, what they have on the roster already when it comes to roster building. So yeah, that was interesting. I honestly don't know. I just always lean into when a GM, again, he didn't pick McDermott, but usually when they fire a coach, the team goes in a different direction than what they had. And of course that was a defensive minded coach.
And I do think I wonder too, not that they're going to make a decision based on this, but they know the temperature of the room and everything, and talking so much about the fan base or recognizing it or helping Allen, it makes me feel like they almost have to go offense, even if they don't want to. But I do agree kind of with that notion for you as well.
Beaks 716, so grateful for what you guys do for us. Thank you. Subscription is awesome. And a scheme neutral hypothetical. Which coaches are the top of the list to retain? Thanks, Ian Ant. Thank you, Beaks 716. That's a tough one, especially after the presser today. I am at a loss.
Which coaches do we retain?
Not the wide receiver coach.
Not the wide receiver coach. I want to be like, does Cromer count?
I know.
Can I say
please?
Cromer?
Pretty please.
Oh man.
I think a guy, probably like a Pellegrino in the secondary.
Boris.
Jordana.
Boris.
Boris. Yeah. Boris is good. Yep. Yeah.
I keep Boris.
I liked what they did in the secondary. We talked about the coverages they started rolling to, and some of that stuff had to do with Jordana and Pellegrino, maybe even Nielsen for that matter. But
so Nielsen's an interesting one overall, like, because I think that the Hoyt injury jacked everything up so much, but I could go either way on Nielsen. Tabor, I thought special teams was cool. I'd be cool with Tabor. A bunch of people saying that in the chat. That's fair. Jamil Adai.
Yeah, that's a good one. I thought they started playing with his techniques a lot better this year. He's a good one. No, it's gonna be tough. Again, they could. Again, a lot of these guys, not all of them, a lot of these guys are technically still under contract, but also are pretty faithful to Sean McDermott.
Fair.
And maybe even some other coaches that are already on other staffs that need guys. So it's going to be interesting. I would imagine that regardless of who they bring in, I think they will give the option to these coaches to say, hey, you can talk to this new coach that we just hired, or just kind of go on your way if you have something lined up. But you can be sure that these coaches are looking into other opportunities eventually.
Awesome more chat. Thank you for the kind words.
Yeah, thank you, man. Let's see here. Let's do this last one on a scale of 1 to 10, being not optimistic, 1 being not optimistic, 10 being super sure. How optimistic are each of you about this move? A different Brian. Thank you. Another one of our insiders. A different Brian, not another Brian, a different Brian.
About the McDermott firing?
Yeah.
I'm I'm 50-50 on it because I really do think, I think you can do better than McDermott, but I also think you can do worse. It's just hard to parse and know which. Like, the grass isn't always greener. Like, you can fire your coach and take off. You can fire your coach and stay the same, or you can fire your coach and absolutely torpedo. What muddies this for me is, again, I think so much of the shortcomings, along with the successes, were tied to both Beane and McDermott. And I don't know how much of the shortcomings are bothersome from Beane, but I just don't have I don't have a ton of faith in that side at this point. So I'm gonna say 50-50, maybe so 5 out of 10, maybe like 4.7.
I was gonna say 5-5. 1, because I hate change.
Fair.
I hate change. All right. 1,
Fair.
I hate change. 2, to your point, they were so intermingled between McDermott and Beane. It's hard to tell. It's hard to differentiate that. But the funny thing is that everyone, I'm sure all the people, your job, your friends are texting you like, man, what are the Bills doing? They're asking about it. And we get into the weeds with it at times, I'm sure. But I just kept saying, I honestly could justify and argue both sides. I could argue why Pegula fired him, and I could argue why they should have kept him. And so that puts me dead center in the middle. I'll say 5-5 though, because I do think, as we kind of led off with, I do think Pegula has a point about, how often they lost these big games in heartbreak fashion. And, Bills fans, especially the ones that are older and been through the 4 Super Bowls, have been through a lot of heartache and pain when it comes to the playoffs, when it comes to losing Super Bowls. And then when you add in the drought and all of those years and what we had to sit through, we have calluses. We do. And we added a lot of them under McDermott. But at the very same time, we all can appreciate him, the man, the coach, and how respectful he was to everyone and anyone. And I told that story on social media because after I watched that video last night that the Bills put up on McDermott, that 3-minute video, and I was tearing up a little bit. I told the story about when Russ Brown and I were at the Senior Bowl the year that Josh was in the draft.
Yes.
Baker Mayfield was there. Josh Allen was there. Like a lot of big names. That was my first year and Cover One's first year at the Senior Bowl. And we were coming out of the bleachers, and it was when the coaching staffs and front office personnel were in the same area as just guys like us. And so I always used to obviously try to sidle up. Okay, where the Bills sitting? I could see all like 12, 15 of them. I go sit next to them and, trying to pay attention to what they're talking about and what they're looking at. And I remember walking out after that, one of the practices, and coming out of the tunnel. And I had the brass to go up to McDermott and introduce myself and, what we're doing here at Cover One. And I also told him, because he asked me, like, what do you do for work? And so I told him what I do for work. And he's like, he shook my hand, looked me right in the eye, and was like, I appreciate what you do. Your job's not easy, but appreciate your service. And that's how we treated people. It didn't matter who it was. And so the man, obviously, he seemed like a great guy. And there's not one person that met him that would really say otherwise. But it was tough. It was a tough decision, I'm sure, for Pegula and this organization. But so yeah, 5-5 for me, man. It's a huge risk. It's a huge risk.
And that's been my thing the whole time. Like, sure, they could hire Clint Kubiak and might go to the moon. They could hire Clint Kubiak and be 3-14. Like, you can make the case.
And Josh is like 30 years old now, so it's like, oh.
And there's a lot of retooling that has to be done potentially defensively. There's some cap issues going on. Yeah, man, it's not it's murky and muddy, and we'll kind of see.
We're not gonna have an answer for a while, and so we're gonna
until they hire Anthony Lynn tomorrow.
Oh, dude! All right, yeah, and guys, like, pump the brakes on the reactions to who's being brought in and everything. Obviously, add context, talk about it and everything, but hold your emotions back, because, like, I mean, Anthony Lynn being the first guy that was kind of released, prior to this presser about being brought in for an interview, like, people are flipping out. It's like, man, just relax. And
they're going to interview a lot of guys. I thought Anarumo was interesting. Like, I wanted him to come last year to DC, and I was like, oh, yeah, they're going to kick the tires. on a lot of dudes. And there you go. Positivity in the chat. Go 3-14 and then get Jeremiah Smith from Ohio State. I like that. They got to think in the future. Be positive. Be positive. I like that. Whatever happens, coaching wise, the staff, college prospect evaluations, free agent evaluations, whatever it is, we will have you covered here in the film room as we start to move forward in this offseason process, which has started off with a bang in every way, shape, and form. So we will continue to kind of move forward here in the film room. Whatever the Bills do, good or bad, positive or negative. Erik, any final thoughts or parting words for everyone or anyone as we start to wrap up and say goodbye?
Yeah, thank you, obviously, everyone, for joining us, sitting through an hour and 50 minutes of us rambling on about this presser today. A little curveball, not going, into the film of the Bills-Broncos game, but we'll eventually get there. Maybe we won't. We don't know yet. But
I still haven't finished it. I'm too upset. I don't want to watch it. I've watched bits and pieces, and every time I do, I watch like 5 or 6 plays, and I'm like, I've had enough, and I go somewhere else.
And as that, the interview candidates kind of get whittled down and thrown out there, we'll start adding some context to them and things that are tied to them and how they translate and how they, would fit in Buffalo. We'll obviously have that for you. And overall, thank you to our insiders that, our subscribers to our premium content, really just access to our Discord where we talk football all day. There's movie channels, analytics, film. We have a little bit of everything in our Discord server. So if you're interested in, the little nuggets and stuff that we get and information we get, join our insiders at cover1.football. Carl Tolman, always a great follow here in the film room, always making some good comments. He says, to end the show, I'm still so angry. I am angry at the league for blowing the Cooks catch. We should still be in the mix. Pegula stated that it was a catch, but fired McDermott anyway. There is no one better to replace him. As those are fair reactions. We just said we're kind of on the fence about it ourselves, but given what Pegula said and how he framed it, I get it. But to Carl's point, McDermott probably is the best prospect as far as coaches go on the market.
I was gonna say he got fired, and there were so many people that were like, he rockets up to the top of like the coaching free agent list right now. Like Erik said, Carl, you're awesome. You're here all the time. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the super chat. I'm angry too. I haven't felt this way. This season had 2 for me. After the Texans loss and after this one, it got me emotional and angry in ways that I didn't think existed after 13 seconds because I thought I was dead inside. But yeah, there were just so many moments in this game that frustrated me. And yeah, Erik, like you said, like I understand Pegula's reasoning. I just don't holistically or wholeheartedly agree with it. Especially even after like he talked about the whole, but what is success? Is success being in the playoffs 7 years in a row with no Super Bowl appearance? He gets asked after that about like, that decision and how much goes into, your evaluation of coaching versus roster construction being responsible for the team's shortcomings. And he says literally like, that's a hard question to answer. I don't know how to answer that. And my thought is like, but you fired the coach, so you should have an answer to that question because in theory, you blamed the coach then, the coaching for that failure instead of the roster construction. So again, I understand where he's coming from, the thought process, especially when we showed that clip. It was very succinct. I'm just not completely on board with his reasoning, considering how culpable everyone is and how interconnected everything is. Like we talked about the collaboration, all the interconnectedness between coaching staff from the top to bottom, the personnel staff, the scouts, the front office, everything. Everything's so tangled and so woven together. It's why, and on the field too, when we do these shows, everyone's like, oh, come tell me why, Bobby Babich is the one to blame for this loss. And it's like, it's not completely on one person or one player or one side of the ball. There's so much, which makes us all muddy, but we will help you try and parse through the muddiness every single week here on this show going forward. I guess this kind of, even though we're in the new year, I guess this is the last episode of like maybe of the 2025 season for us. So thank you for another awesome season. Everyone who tuned in. Whether you're an insider, whether you're a YouTube watcher, an audio platform listener, a super chat giver, a kind word giver, if you drop likes, ratings, reviews, subscriptions, word of mouth, whatever form or fashion your support comes in, we're always tremendously thankful for it and appreciative for it. We hope you folks enjoyed this episode, enjoyed another season of content. We will be right back here regularly going forward as we throw ourselves into the offseason. Now we start to get into free agent targets and fit and film and cost. And then we go from there into college prospect evaluation and potential boards and who's going to be available and what way they need to go and fill in spots on the roster. And the Bills will probably do another red wedding to us on a Wednesday before we go live and throw the roster into upheaval, and it'll cause us to have to pivot.
That's Beane.
Yeah, that's Beane. And we'll see what happens going forward here. We appreciate all of you folks. And that'll do it for us here in this episode of the Cover One Film Room. For myself, Anthony Prohaska, for the godfather and founder of Cover One, Mr. Eric Turner, we hope you and your family and friends and loved ones are all doing well and staying safe. Be kind to one another. Take care of one another. We will see you when we see you. Godspeed. Try and stay calm. And as always,